I'm Mark Seifter, co-creator of Pathfinder 2nd Edition and director of game design for Roll for Combat.
And I'm Linda Zayas-Palmer, tabletop RPG freelancer working primarily with Pathfinder 2nd Edition and Starfinder.
And today, we're here to talk to you about a 5-room dungeon for the 2025 Dungeon Jam that we call the Goblin Market. It's based off of Christina Rosetti's 1862 poem, Goblin Market, and it's inspired by that. So you can go ahead and read that poem if you want for inspiration, but you won't need it to be able to deal with this dungeon. Now, the dungeon map, as you can see, is up there in the corner. It's a very simplified dungeon map. That's because this is not only setting neutral, like all of the dungeons in this jam this year will be, is also system neutral. It's meant to work not just for crunch-heavy systems like Pathfinder 2nd Edition and Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, but also for OSR, Shadow Dark, or even for Powered by the Apocalypse or Forged in the Dark type games, which could include Daggerheart. So we are hoping that people are going to play this dungeon across a variety of different systems. So with that little introduction to the dungeon out of the way, let's dig right into the 5-room dungeon. You'll notice in the map, areas A, B, C, and D are on the perimeter, and E is in the middle. What this means is, in this Goblin Market, you can come across any of those first 4 areas as the first area you encounter. When the PCs come in, they'll come in from one of those sides. You could roll it at random, or pick the one that you think your players will be most interested in encountering first, or that would give a good first impression that will allow them to enjoy the market more. Maybe the one they're less likely to just attack immediately on sight, unless you think they would want to attack on sight, that you maybe could throw them at that one. Area E, on the other hand, is in the center of the Goblin Market, and it can only be reached from going to one of the other areas first. As you can also see, A cannot get to C without first passing through one of the other areas, and B cannot get to D. They don't like each other very much. Let's get into that.
Speaking of Area A is where you'll find the Goblin Fruit Merchants, led by Fezwick Greentoes, who is a slick and sly goblin merchant. Beware the fairy food and drinks at his stall. They addict people and then spirit them away. Fezwick hates the red caps that can be found in Area C.
So when we're dealing with this Goblin Fruit Merchant stall is kind of the namesake of the entire this entire Goblin Market dungeon. That doesn't mean that there's Goblin Fruit Merchants everywhere, but it has this theme of beware the fairy food and drink. Who knows what's going to happen to you? You see it not just in Rosetti's poem, but in Rip Van Winkle and just a lot of fairy lore. Now, there could be themes that you find in the idea of getting drugged by these fairy food and drink that might not settle well with every group. So you may want to consider that some groups either don't want to deal with the fairy food and drink causing a character to potentially be lost or an NPC to be lost, or that they might attack the goblins on sight for doing something like that. And that's all right. The idea of this dungeon is it could be a very roleplay heavy dungeon where you have to deal with like sort of fairy bargains and politics, or that the PCs might get into a scrape or a fight. Now, if you have a setting where goblins don't belong in a fairy market, you might want to consider replacing the goblins in Area A with another type of creature that is not the same. D&D 2024 has changed goblins to be fae, and in many other settings, goblins or hobgoblins, which were described as types of fairies even in Shakespeare's time, might be fae. But if your goblins are like not sophisticated enough in your setting to set up a merchant stall and would be more likely to just like gigglingly attack anybody who comes across them, you can use a different type of fairy for these goblin fruit merchants. So let's move on to Area B, the Fairy Dragon Games. It's led by Alakizian the Mighty, who is a tiny fairy dragon with a huge ego. When you come to the Fairy Dragon Games, you can gamble coins in a variety of games of chance and skill in order to win either more coins or special prizes that have been listed and labeled by the Fairy Dragons. However, the games are subtly rigged to grow the fairy dragon's hordes rather than to let those visitors walk away with more money or prizes that are worth more than what they gambled. Now, the fairy dragons who run these games are business rivals of the curiosity shops in Area D.
So when you're considering what to do for these games, think back to your own experiences for carnival games. they're approachable enough to feel like you can win if you just try a little bit harder. Or that maybe you saw someone winning before and you're certain that you're going to be the one who gets the chance. But there's always going to be a little twist to that. How hard is it for your characters to notice that twist? Are they going to believe that they can get it, or are they going to catch it? And with the nature of the twist, is it some kind of a mechanical thing? Maybe there's an optical illusion, or perhaps there's some dragon magic at play. If they figure out the secret, how are they going to respond to that? Are they going to try to exploit the trick to win big, or are they going to try to confront the dragon and threaten to expose the truth if they don't get some sort of reward in exchange? You might take inspiration from games like dart throwing balls, throwing rings, fishing, all sorts of things that you would find at a real carnival, as well as things that could have a magical twist or a draconic theme to them. We've also got the, as we mentioned before, that the Goblin Fruit Merchant hates the Red Caps. Red Caps have their own arena here in Area C, led by Robin the Bloody, who is an aggressive and bloodthirsty Red Cap. I mean, that's kind of how Red Caps usually roll. I'm not sure we have to specify that, but just so you know, who respects strength above all else. Their fighting arena pays out with new fairy weapons, but blood will be spilled one way or the other. They absolutely hate those Goblin Fruit Merchants, and the trickery that they use with their fairy food and drink. They would rather, if they win, do it by force of their direct and brute strength.
That's right. So it's possible that the PCs just don't like Bloodsport and they may just attack these Red Caps right away. But the idea is that this gives your group a chance to fight, even if they're not going to go aggro on this Goblin Market. They can still fight in the arena. You can use a creature that is appropriate for their level, or you could use something that's wildly stronger or weaker depending on what you want to do. But these are death matches, and if the PCs cheat by saying that they're going to do a one-on-one and having everybody else join in or trying to run away, the Red Caps are possibly going to get upset with that. Now, what about these magical fairy weapons? Well, it's likely that they have powerful magic ability, but they also likely have a drawback or requirement. A common one that you might expect from weapons made by a Red Cap are that they may need to be soaked in blood, like the Red Cap that the Red Caps wear themselves to empower themselves. So consider the concept of, the PCs won this challenging arena combat and they got a really nice weapon, but it needs to be soaked in blood. What does that mean for the character who now has to soak their weapon in blood, or the weapon gets thirsty and upset? May even be an intelligent weapon who may be only empathic, maybe even able to talk, and able to communicate its bloodthirst in some way. So, moving on to Area D, the Curiosity Shops. Now, we mentioned before, they're rivals of the Fairy Dragon games. They're led by Liminier, who's an eccentric brownie who loves collecting things and then sharing them with others. Gremlins, brownies, and sprites sell bizarre knickknacks that each have an unknown random effect. Even the gremlins, brownies, and sprites aren't exactly sure what those items are going to do. Now, they're rivals of the fairy dragons. Fairy dragons feel like trying to sell these random things is not what you should do, because you know what the prizes are for the fairy dragon games, whereas the brownies, gremlins, and sprites feel that the fairy dragons are a little crooked with the way that they are playing rigged games, and that you always make a fair exchange at the Curiosity Shop, and whether or not it's a good item or not, that's a gamble that everyone is equally taking. It's not like they are trying to intentionally get you to take bad items.
So when you're thinking about what to populate your Curiosity Shop with, you can think about things that have superstitions tied to them in the real world, things that are associated with fairy stories in the real world. The lock of hair from The Last Princess of a Forgotten Kingdom, for example. You can put all sorts of items in there, and they also may be items that don't necessarily look like much. Seeing is not necessarily believing when it comes to fairy items. The thing that looks like a grand golden chalice may be, in fact, a forgery, whereas an unassuming gnarled stick could be filled with great power. Since Liminier themselves doesn't know what the powers of the items are, That means that there's not necessarily a really strong connection between the form and the function, which means that you can use a random table, such as a D100 table, to pull together a list of effects that they might have, and then roll randomly on that to determine what the items do. These items might be things that the PCs can take with them for a long period of time and use over and over again in a reliable way. They may be things that have one effect, or they may be things somewhat like what you'll see in some Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons-y style games of like a Rod of Wonder, an item that does different things each time you use it. You also, in the center of the whole market here, have the Fortune Teller, Area E, run by Lady Vera, an exiled Norn fortune teller who weaves fate to give powerful benefits of her choice, but takes something of value in exchange. What she takes is going to depend upon the person, of course, as is typical with these sorts of legends. As the most powerful being in the marketplace, she is theoretically the lady of this market, because she deals with the disputes that arise. And the disputes are many, not just between the different factions within the market that have conflicts with each other, but also with the various people who come to the market and may take issue with some of the challenges and games presented.
That's right. So Lady Vera is not only perhaps one of the most interesting shops that are in this market, she's also potentially a plot device for what happens if the PCs and the marketeers sort of escalate with each other past a certain point. Lady Vera might come in to break things up. That doesn't mean that she's going to unilaterally side with the Fae who are at the market. If she feels that the Fae cross the line, she might also side partially with the PCs. She's meant to be somewhat of a more neutral arbiter. She's not together in a faction with any of the other four groups. Instead, she's the one who kind of holds this market together by her force of personality and her power. Even though she's an exiled Norn, Norns are generally considered a pretty powerful creature, depending on what system or setting that you're using. Now, what are these benefits that she gives of her choice? They could be almost anything. She decides. And you could create them in a variety of ways. You could do a tarot reading and just draw a card and decide based on which card you drew what kind of benefits to give. Anything that ties together with fortune telling can add just an additional mystical effect to the way that it feels that Lady Vera is creating these benefits. Whereas if you just kind of pick them completely off the top of your head, they could prove arbitrary. If you have an idea for the story ahead, or the player character has put story ideas, depending on your system, they might have different story hooks or aspects to their character, then it can be easy to tie onto those something that is related to their fate, as she is an exiled Norn. What she asks for in exchange, well, that could be an entire campaign hook on its own, or it can be something that seemed like it was nothing at first, only to turn out to be incredibly crucial later on. So that's the market. You can use this for so many different adventures, and it only depends on how your group reacts and just sort of how the players and their characters are, and the system that you're running it with. We expect that you would be able to use this for just a huge variety of different systems, and we're really excited to see people doing that. If you check the links below, you'll see a link to our Discord where we have all the information on the dungeon available for free, as well as a thread to discuss if people are coming up with D100 effects for various different games for those curiosity shops, different ideas for creatures to fight against in the arena, games of chance from people's favorite carnival games or fantasy-based versions, or ideas for special fate-based effects from Lady Vera, anything like that. Put them in there, and if anybody wants to run them, we'll be very excited to hear about people running them in a variety of different systems.
It's always interesting to look at the contrast between what the GM expects when they set a situation before the players and what the players come up with.
That's right. So, until next time, everyone, good gaming, and we hope you enjoyed this dungeon and all the rest of the dungeons in this year's Dungeon Jam 2025. Bye, everyone!
Bye!